قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. I welcome everyone back to the fifth and final class in these brief lectures series of Manhaj Ahle-Hadith, the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith. In our previous lecture, we had started discussing the position of the Ahle-Hadith regarding the four well-known schools of thought, or the four Madhahib, the Hanafi and the Maliki and the Shafi'i and the Hanbali Madhab. We started discussing how and when these four Madhahib they came into existence. We related on the speech of Imam Ibn Hazm rahimahullah and Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, that they mentioned that these four madhahib and fanatism and extremism towards them, one blindly following them and confining oneself and restricting oneself to everything in one of these four madhahib, in the fatwa and the positions and the statements found in one of these four madhahib, then this innovation, this bid'ah, as these scholars have labeled it, this innovation then it started after the first three generations of Islam, the first three blessed generations whom the Prophet ﷺ praised regarding their knowledge and their piety and their methodology. So this phenomenon developed after these three generations had passed, and the people deviated and innovated a new methodology in jurisprudence of Islam by way of restricting and confining themselves and blindly following, making taqleed of one of these four madhahib. We also mentioned some of the reasons why these madhahib became prevalent and why they spread and why they are amongst us today. From the foremost of the reasons that we mentioned is that the rulers and the political power in that time, they had a major role in spearheading, spreading these madhahib. The scholars of these madhahib, they reached high ranks near these rulers, and these rulers would not appoint any judge, any qadi, or any imam, or any muazzin, or any mufti, or any mudarris teacher, except that he was a blind follower of one of these four madhahib. One of the reasons we mentioned is worldly gains and benefits, that there were scholars who reached a high level in the sciences of Islam where they could have left being counted amongst the ignorants who blindly follow these madhahib and restrict and confine themselves to one of them. But these scholars, they placed the worldly benefits from position and rank and benefits that they would receive from the governments and the political powers in that time, and their fear of the people, that the people would shun them and reject them, and they would not accept from them except that they blindly follow one of these four madhahib. Out of these benefits and fears, they remain confined and restricted to one of these four madhahib. We mentioned the example of a-Subki who his own scholars from the Shafi'i madhab, they deemed to have reached a level where he could have left being a blind follower of the Shafi'i madhab, but he chose the benefits of this worldly life, and he feared that the people would ridicule him, curse him, and would not accept from him, would shun him, reject him, and label him to be an innovator. And these benefits and fears led him to remain confined to the Shafi'i madhab. Rather, he was one of the well-known fanatics, well-known hardcore blind followers of the Shafi'i madhab, as his books are clear proofs of that. Then we mentioned that these 4 madhahib that have reached us or that are amongst us today, these are not the only madhahib and these are not the only fuqaha, the jurists of Islam. They are not only 4, Imam Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi and Ahmad. Rather, there were great jurists before them from the Imams of the Salaf. And they were great jurists during their times. And they are great jurists after them. And some of these jurists, they also had madhahib and schools of thought that existed and whose statements and fatwa and positions were mentioned along with the positions of these 4 imams. But these 4 imams, for the reasons we just outlined, their madhahib were spread and they remained, while the other madhahib, they ceased to exist. They ceased to exist and they're not amongst us today. But one can still find the statements of these great imams such as Imam Sufyan al-Thawri and Imam al-Awza'i and Imam Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak and Imam al-Layth ibn Sa'ad and Imam Ishaq ibn Rahuya, and other than them from the great jurists of Islam. They can find their statements in the books of hadith, in the books of the Ahle-Hadith that have preserved the fiqh and jurisprudence of these great imams of the Salaf. Because the Ahle-Hadith, they follow the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, and they use the statements of these great fuqaha and jurists and scholars as something that they can benefit from in order to understand the Quran and the Sunnah without having any fanatism and extremism and blind following a single one of them. After that, we will now continue with our last and final lecture regarding these 4 madhahib and the position of the Ahlul-Hadith regarding these madhahib and some aspects that one can mention regarding these 4 madhahib. We will start off by mentioning that these 4 madhahib, they caused a great splitting and differing in the Muslim nation. The Muslims whom Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has ordered with unity to be united upon the Quran and the Sunnah, the 2 wahis, the 2 revelations that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has revealed, the Quran being the speech of Allah and the Sunnah being its explanation that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This Quran and Sunnah, this revelation that causes unity, the Muslims and the fanatics and extremists of these madhahib and their muqallideen and blind followers, they have split the ummah and divided it into 4 groups. And every group being pleased with what it has. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَاعْتَسِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, that hold firmly to the rope of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the rope of Allah, Hablullah, has been explained by the Salaf to mean the religion of Allah that He has revealed in the Quran and the Sunnah. Hold firmly to it and do not divide. Do not divide. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا. Do not divide into groups and sects. Allah Ta'ala also says, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ, that He ordered the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the final prophet and messenger, to inform the people that my path, the path that I am upon, then that is the straight path. Follow it, make ittiba of it, make ittiba of the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ, and do not follow the paths that divide you and that take you away from my straight path, the path of the Sunnah. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala informed us about past nations, the people who passed before us, the Muslim nation, by saying, شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ وَمَا وَصَّيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. That Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has ordered the Muslims with the same order that He has revealed to the prophets before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from Nuh alayhi salam and Ibrahim and Musa and Isa alayhimus salam. What has Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala ordered them with and revealed to them? An aqimud deena wa la tatafarraqu fi, that establish the religion of Allah that Allah Ta'ala has revealed according to what Allah Ta'ala has revealed in the revelation, and do not divide. Do not divide into groups and sects. Allah Ta'ala has warned the people from dividing and splitting, in which in an ayah He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. Allah Ta'ala orders the Prophet Muhammad to inform the people that those who have divided and split into Shia, into groups and sects, لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. Inform them that the Prophet is free from them. He is not amongst them. He is free from them. And this is dividing and splitting. This is the hallmarks of the people before us, from the non-Muslims and the disbelievers. Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا. That do not be from the mushrikeen, those people who associate partners with Allah Azza wa Jal in His worship and who disbelieve. Who are these people? They are those who split up their religion. They divided their religion and they were Shia. They were groups and sects. And these four madhahib and fanatism and extremism towards them and blind following them and confining and restricting oneself to them has led to the exact reality that Allah Ta'ala has forbidden and warned the Muslims from in these ayat, of not following the ways of the people before them, to split up and divide the religion into various sects and groups. And they have left that which Allah Ta'ala has ordered them with and guided them to with unity and holding steadfast to the revelation, the Quran and the Sunnah. Every one of this group, every one of these four madhahib, the blind followers and fanatics and extremists of them, they are happy with what they are upon. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاتَّقُونَ فَتَقَطَّعُوا أَمْرَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ زُبُرًا كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. That this nation, this Muslim nation, this ummah, the Muslims are one nation. And I am, Allah Ta'ala says, He is the one Lord who is worthy of being worshipped. So fear Him. So fear Him and do not be from those who split up their religion into groups and sects. كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. Every group and sect being pleased and happy with what they are upon, thinking and deeming themselves to be above and preferred over the others, as we'll mention in our coming minutes, how these madhahib have opposed the very meaning of this ayah of the Quran that Allah Ta'ala has revealed. What have these madhahib, these four madhahib and blind following and fanatism, extremism towards them and restricting, confining oneself to one of them, what have they presented to the Islamic nation and the Muslims? Except for deviation and splitting and hatred and animosity and wars, as we'll mention. From that which these four madhahib have presented to the Muslims and have caused is outright rejection of the Quran and the Sunnah. Fanatism, extremism and blind following these madhahib has caused and led to the outright rejection of the Quran and the Sunnah, or to claim that the Quran, the ayat of Allah Azza wa Jal, or the Ahadith of Prophet Muhammad that they are abrogated, they are mansukh, they are abrogated, or to deem them to be of lesser importance and significance, or to make ta'wil, and to misinterpret the Quran and the Sunnah. Abu Al-Karhi, he passed away in the year 340 after the Hijrah. He is known as Shaykh al-Hanafiyya. His title is the Supreme Scholars, one of the Supreme Scholars of the Hanafis. He was the Mufti of Iraq in his time. Iraq, which was the capital and seat of the Abbasid Caliphate in those times. He was the Mufti of this vast land of Iraq, in which the Hanafiyas were in power and majority, and as we mentioned, their political power was ruling those lands. Al-Karhi, Abu al-Hasan Ubaidullah ibn al-Hussein ibn al-Dallal al-Karhi, he says in his book Al-Usul, Usul al-Karhi, it is a well-known book of the Usul al-Fiqh of the Hanafi Madhab, the book that has compiled the rules and regulations of the Hanafi Madhab, the rules and the principles of jurisprudence of the Hanafi Madhab. Rather, it is the oldest book in Usul al-Fiqh al-Hanafi that has reached us, the oldest book in combining the principles of the Hanafi Madhab. In this book, he has mentioned 40 principles from the Hanafi Madhab that the Hanafis are upon, and upon them is to bind themselves and restrict themselves to them. He has mentioned 40 principles that all of the Hanafis after him have blindly followed and confined themselves and restricted themselves to them. And it is not permissible in their views, in their eyes, to oppose a single one of these principles. He says in one of these principles, he says, Al-Aslu anna kulla ayatin tukhalif qawla ashabina fa innaha tuhmalu ala al-nasakh. He says that from the principles of the Hanafi Madhab is that every ayah of the Quran, if it opposes the position and fatwa and statement of the Hanafis, of our companions, meaning the Hanafis, then which of the two is one to leave, which of the two is one to reject? Not the Hanafi position and fatwa and statement. Rather, one is to reject the Quran, the statement, the ayah of the Quran, and to deem it to be abrogated, to deem it to be mansukh. The Hanafi position and statement fatwa, it can never be mansukh. But the ayah of Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran, that it is to be ruled upon to be mansukh, to be mansukh. Then he says, if one is not able to rule upon the ayah of Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran to be mansukh, to be abrogated, then he says, aw ala at-tarjih, then it is to be deemed that which is weaker. Which of the two is weaker? The position, the fatwa of the Hanafi Madhab? No, the statement, the speech of Allah Azza wa Jal, the ayah of the Quran, it is to be deemed marjuh, weaker than the statement and position of the Hanafis. Then he says, وَالْأَوْلَى أَن تُحْمَلَ عَلَى التَّعْوِيلِ مِنْ جِهَةَ التَّوْفِيقِ. And better than these two options, which is to deem a ayah from the Quran to be abrogated or to be weak in its strength, then he says the better than these two positions is to make ta'wil, is to make away with its proper meaning and to distort its meaning so that it becomes in line with the Hanafi madhab and fatwa and statement. It becomes in line with the Hanafi madhab and statement and fatwa. So this is just one example of how these four madhahib and fanatism, extremism towards them has led to the rejection of the Book of Allah and deeming it to be abrogated or deeming it to be lesser in strength or making, distorting away its meaning and making misinterpretations of its meaning. Then Al-Karhi, he continues with another foundational principle of the Hanafi madhab. After this principle, he mentions another principle, Al-Aslu, أن كل خبر يجيء بخلاف قول أصحابنا فإنه يحمل على النسخ. Now that he has finished with the Book of Allah, now he moves on to the Ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is the foundational principle of the Hanafi madhab regarding the Ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He says that every hadith that is against the statement and fatwa and position of the Hanafis, then it is to be deemed abrogated. Which one of the two is to be deemed to be mansukh, abrogated? Not the statement and fatwa of the Hanafis, rather the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he says, أو على أنه معارض بمثله ثم يسار إلى دليل آخر. or it is to be deemed any hadith that opposes the position and fatwa and statements of the Hanafi madhab, then it is to be deemed, that hadith to be deemed in opposition to another hadith that we do not even know about. That our Imams and the Hanafis, they would not have opposed this hadith, except that there's another hadith that it is in opposition to, that we do not even know about and we do not even need to question. We do not even need to question. This hadith for sure, it is in opposition to another hadith that our Hanafis have based their position and fatwa upon, that we do not even know. And it is not upon us to ponder and even question. Then he says, if these two options are not possible, that to deem the hadith to be abrogated, or to deem the hadith to be in opposition to another hadith that we do not know about, then he says, أو ترجيح في, or the final conclusion is to deem the hadith to be of lesser significance and importance and weight in comparison to the Hanafi position and fatwa and madhab. This is how these four madhahib and fanatism, extremism towards them, blind following them, has led to the rejection of the Quran and the Sunnah, and reducing its status and deeming it to be abrogated, and doing away with its meanings and misinterpreting them in order to give strength and aid to the fatwa and positions and statements of these madhahib. To the point that one of the Hanafis, his name is Yusuf ibn Musa al-Malati, Jamaluddin Yusuf ibn Musa ibn Muhammad al-Malati al-Halabi al-Hanafi, and he was not just any normal Hanafi. Rather, it is mentioned in his biography that he was the Qadi of the Hanafis in Misr, in the land, the vast land of Egypt. He was the supreme judge of the Hanafis in Egypt. He passed away in the year 803. He has a book in the Hanafi fiqh that is titled Al-Mu'tasir min Al-Mukhtasir, in which he has summarized the book Ma'ani al-Athar of Imam al-Tahawi, Ma'ani al-Athar of Imam al-Tahawi, in the Hanafi madhab. So this supreme judge of the Hanafis in Egypt, the one who has authored books in the Hanafi madhab, what does he say regarding the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and regarding the most authentic book after the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, Sahih al-Bukhari, that all of the Muslims have agreed and accepted and considered every hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari to be authentic. And anyone who opposes this belief, then he is deemed to be an innovator. What does he say about Sahih al-Bukhari? He says, Man nadhara fi kitab al-Bukhari tazandaqa. That whoever looks into the book of Imam al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Bukhari, and follows it, and ponders upon it, and acts upon it, tazandaqa, he will become a zindiq. He will become a heretic who will leave the religion of Islam. This has been narrated by Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah, in his book, Imba al-Ghumar, bi Abna al-Umar. And he is someone who has seen and met this Hanafi Qadi, this judge, supreme judge of Egypt, where Imam Ibn Hajar resided and lived. He narrates this statement upon him directly in this book, hearing it directly from him. This is the level that the blind followers and the fanatics and extremists, they reached in rejecting the Quran and the Sunnah, to the point that they deemed a person who follows and looks and ponders and benefits from the most authentic book after the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, the most authentic book of Hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari, that he will become a heretic and a zindiq who will leave the religion of Islam. What have these four madhahib given to the Muslim Ummah and the Muslims? The second thing we'll mention, after outright rejection of the Quran and the Sunnah and diminishing their status and misinterpreting them and deeming them to be abrogated, the second thing that these madhahib have given is accusing and ridiculing and mocking the best of the Muslims, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'een, the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who were the conveyors and the safeguarders of the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Ahle-Hadith. So they did not even leave these people alone. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who is considered by the Hanafis to be one of the foremost of their scholars who they claim to be upon his methodology in jurisprudence. He says, كانوا يأخذون من حديث أبي هريرة ويدعون. He says regarding the great Sahabi and companion Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, the one who is known as Rawiyatul Islam, the one who conveyed the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the Muslims, the link between Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims, the one who has narrated and conveyed and memorized and preserved the most number of ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why have they, as we will see in coming statements, why have they focused their attention on Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu? Because he is the head of the body, the one who deems to cut off and finish the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it is enough that he cuts off the head from the body. So if Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu is attacked and mocked and deemed, as we will mention, that they mention that he is deemed to be someone who doesn't have understanding in the religion of Islam, wal-iyadhu billah, then the remaining of the Sahaba and the remaining of the Sunnah is easy. This is the person who has narrated the most ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibrahim al-Nakhai, he says that there were people in Iraq in the beginning stages of the Ahlur-Rai, the people who opposed the Ahle-Hadith in their methodology and jurisprudence, who derived rulings and fatwa from the statements and positions of the scholars of Islam. He says that they used to take and accept the hadith of Abu Huraira, and then they would also reject his hadith. They would also reject his hadith. Why would they reject his hadith, and in what aspects? We will come to see. Ibrahim al-Nakhai also says, كانوا يرون في أحاديث أبي هريرة شيئا, that they used to see that the ahadith that Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu has narrated, then there's some issues with these ahadith. They used to believe that there were some issues with their ahadith that they did not feel comfortable with. وَمَا كَانُوا يَأْخُذُونَ بِكُلِّ حَدِيث أَبِي هُرَيْرَةَ إِلَّا مَا كَانَ مِنْ حَدِيث صِفَةِ جَنَّةٍ أَوْ نَارٍ أَوْ نَهْيٍ عَنْ شَرٍّ جَاءَ الْقُرْآنُ بِهِ. That they would only accept from Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu those ahadith that were in relation to ahadith that describe describe heaven and hellfire, and those ahadith in that are reiteration of some of the signs of the major signs of the coming of the last the final hour that the Quran itself has come with. Those ahadith that are just reiteration of what the Quran have come with regarding the major signs preceding the judgment day. Meaning that they would not take from Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu ahadith that he narrated in jurisprudence, in halal and haram, in matters of fiqh and jurisprudence. Then they go further. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Imam al-Zahabi, when he mentions the biography of Ibrahim al-Nakhai in his book Mizanul I'tidal, in which he collected the biographies of the weak narrators of hadith, he says, وَنَقَمُوا عَلَيْهِ قَوْلَهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ أَبُو هُرَيْرَةَ فَقِيهًا. Then they go on to the final stage that Imam al-Zahabi says that the scholars have rejected upon Ibrahim al-Nakhai this statement that he made, that Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu lam yakun faqihan. He was not a faqih. He was not a jurist. He was not someone who was giving understanding in the religion of Islam. Imam al-Zahabi narrated this statement also in his great book Siyar Alam an-Nubula, in the biography of Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu. Then he comments upon it by saying, هذا لا شيء بل احتج المسلمون قديما وحديثا بحديثه وبحفظه وجلالته وإتقانه وفقهه. He says, this statement of Ibrahim al-Nakhai, it is of no value. It is to be rejected and shunned. It is of no value that Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu was not a faqih, was not someone who was given understanding in the religion of Islam, and who was not a jurist. He said, it is enough that all of the Muslims from the past times to the present times, they have accepted the ahadith of Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, and they have given proof of his outright precise memorization of the Ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his nobility and virtue, and his fiqh, and his jurisprudence and understanding the religion of Islam. وَنَاهِيكَ أَنَّ مِثَلِ ابْنَ عَبَّاسِ يَتَعَدَّبْ مَعَهُ وَيَقُولْ أَفْتِي يَا أَبَا هُرَيْرَةَ. Then he says it is enough for the Muslims that a person such as Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, he used to give precedence to Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, and he used to say, Afti ya Aba Huraira. When a person would ask Abdullah ibn Abbas a question, he would direct him to Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu and tell him that, oh Abu Huraira, give him your fatwa. That it is enough for the Muslims that Abdullah ibn Abbas relied upon the jurisprudence and upon the understanding of this great Sahabi Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu. And why did Imam al-Zahabi specifically mention Abdullah ibn Abbas here? Because Abdullah ibn Abbas is the one who the Prophet ﷺ made the dua for. Allahumma faqihhu fid deen. Oh Allah, give him the fiqh in the religion of Islam, the knowledge of jurisprudence and understanding of the religion of Islam. So even such a person, he is directing to Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu and giving him precedence in jurisprudence and in understanding of Islam. And it is without doubt that the Hanafis who came after Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, they were affected by him. And this position of his that the scholars have rejected and shunned. The Hanafis, they followed him in this position. For really, the supreme scholar of the Hanafis, to whom this madhab is ascribed, Imam Abu Hanifa, he was from the foremost students of Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman al-Kufi. And Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman al-Kufi was from the foremost students of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. So the Hanafis were affected by the statements and positions of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i to the point that they have based the books that they have written in this madhab, in the Hanafi madhab, based upon this principle that the hadith, if it is narrated by a narrator or by a sahabi who is not a faqih, who is not a jurist, who doesn't have understanding of the religion of Islam, then his hadith is to be rejected and it is not to be accepted. And they foremostly mean by this Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu. Isa ibn Aban, who is from the foremost students of Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. And Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani is one of the two foremost students of Imam Abu Hanifa, along with Al-Qadi Abu Yusuf. So Isa ibn Aban, the foremost student of Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who was also known as Faqih al-Iraq wa Qadi al-Basra, the jurist of Iraq, the stronghold of the Hanafis, and the supreme judge of the city of Basra. He followed his Shaykh and teacher Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i in these positions and statements of his, and he used to say, وَيُقْبَلُ مِنْ حَدِيث أَبِي هُرَيْرَةَ مَا لَمْ يَتِمْ وَهْمُهُ فِي. That we will only accept the hadith of Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu in which he has not made an error and a mistake. In which he has not made an error and a mistake. And he goes on to say, وَيُقْبَلْ مِنْ حَدِيث أَبِي هُرَيْرَةَ مَا لَمْ يَرُدُّهُ الْقِيَاسِ. That we will only accept from the hadith of Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu those ahadith that do not oppose our qiyas, that do not oppose our analogy and our personal positions and fatwa and ruling. Imam al-Zahabi in his book As-Siyar, also in the biography of Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, he narrates on Al-Qadi Abu Tayyib that he says, كنا في مجلس النظر بجامع المنصور فجاء شاب خراساني فسأل عن مسألة المصرات. He says, Abu Tayyib, Al-Qadi Abu Tayyib, that we were in a gathering in the Grand Supreme Masjid of Al-Mansur. So one of the youth from Khurasan, from the area of Khurasan, which is the Persian lands and that which is after it today, he came and he asked regarding the issue of Al-Musarrat. Al-Musarrat. Anyone know what this issue is? Al-Musarrat, the issue is regarding a camel or a cow or a sheep in which the one who wishes to sell one of these animals, he ties up his part where one milks it from, he ties it up so that milk does not exit from it, and he becomes fat and large with the accumulation of milk inside of it. Then he sells it, thereby deceiving the person who buys it that this camel or this cow or sheep is healthy and contains a lot of meat. It is large and heavy in size. But when the person, he buys it, then he starts milking it. Within a few milkings, the sheep or the cow or the camel decreases in size, and he realizes that this weight was not from the meat, rather it was from the milk that was accumulating inside this animal. This is the issue of al-masarrat. And this issue is an issue in which an authentic hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has come, in which Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu narrates on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he said, وَلَا تُسَرُّ الْإِبَلَ وَالْغَنَمَ فَمَنِ ابْتَاعَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَهُوَ بِخَيْرِ النَّظَرَيْنِ بَعْدَ أَنْ يَحْلَبُهَا فَإِنْ رَضِيَهَا أَمْسَكَهَا وَإِنْ سَخِطَهَا رَدَّهَا وَسَاعًا مِنْ تَمْرٍ. That the Prophet ﷺ said, do not practice this act of musarrat with the camels and the sheeps by tying up their part where the milk comes out to increase them in size. And the one who buys such an animal and he has been deceived by that, then he has two choices. After he milks this animal and realizes that he has been deceived, he has two choices. If he wants, he can keep that animal. If he chooses, if he is pleased, he can still keep that animal. And if he doesn't, if he's not pleased and he feels that he has been deceived, then he can return that animal. And this is the point, along with wasa'an min tamr, along with a sa', 4 hand cups of dates, 4 hand cups of dates. And this is a authentic hadith that Imam Bukhari and Muslim in the Sahihain have narrated in the most authentic books of hadith. So the Hanafis, they have used this hadith to attack Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu and to label him to be a ghair faqih, to not be a jurist and someone who has understanding in the religion of Islam, because they said that the person who wishes to return this animal and he has been deceived by it, then he should return with it that which he has milked from it, or something similar to it, another bowl of milk that he has milked, so he returns it to the owner who sold it. Why would one return 4 hand cups of dates? 4 hand cups of dates. So they have attacked Abu Huraira, the narrator of this authentic hadith, based upon this hadith. So this young Hanafi from the area of Khurasan, he came and started to debate and asked regarding this issue. فَطَالَبَ بِالدَّلِيلِ حَتَّى اسْتَدَلَّ بِحَدِيث أَبِي هُرَيْرَةَ الْوَارِدِ فِيهَا فَقَالَ وَكَانَ حَنَفِيًّا. So the Qadi Abu Tayyib, he presented this authentic hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim, that one is to return dates, 4 hand cups of dates along with this animal. So he asked him for the proof, so he presented this hadith. So what did he say when he heard this hadith? وَكَانَ حَنَفِيًّا. Imam Zahabi says he was a Hanafi. He says, Abu Huraira غَيْرُ مَقْبُولَ الْحَدِيث. That Abu Huraira, his hadith is not to be accepted. His hadith is to be rejected. Why? For the sole reason, it has opposed the qiyas, the position, the fatwa, the analogy of the Hanafis. The analogy of the Hanafis. And this is what all of the Hanafis in their books of fiqh and usul al-fiqh have mentioned over generations and generations, that Abu Huraira lam yakun faqihan, huwa ghayru faqih, that he is not a jurist, someone who had understanding in the religion of Islam. And their proof is this authentic hadith that Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim have narrated. So this is another thing that these four madhahib have presented to the Muslim nations, which is ridiculing, mocking the best of the Muslims, the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and rejecting the ahadith they have narrated and labeling them to be deficient in the understanding of Islam and deficient in the understanding of jurisprudence, and that their ahadith that they have narrated, authentic ahadith, are to be left if it opposes the positions and fatwa of these madhahib. The third thing that these madhahib have presented and unleashed upon the Muslim nation is the claim that there can be ta'arud and there can be a conflict between two ayat in the Quran. Between two ayat in the Quran. Every Muslim knows and believes that there is no contradiction in the Quran, as Allah Ta'ala has revealed and said in the Quran that if it was from other than Allah Azza wa Jal, you will find in it great contradiction in the Quran. But it is wahi. It is the speech of Allah, revelation from Allah. There is no contradiction in the Quran. Rather, there is no contradiction between the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But these madhahib have unleashed upon the Muslims that there is contradiction between ayat of the Quran. Mullah Jiyun, he is from the foremost jurists and scholars of the Hanafis. In his book Nur al-Anwar, which is one of the foremost books of the Hanafi madhab, texts of the Hanafi madhab that the Hanafis memorize and recite like the Quran, he says in it, لِأَنَّ الْآيَتَيْنِ إِذَا تَعَارَضَتَا تَسَاقَطَتَا, that if two ayat of the Quran, two ayat from the book of Allah, they are in conflict, then both of them are to be left off. Both of them are not considered to be a proof. Both of them are not considered to be a proof. So, as we just mentioned, that the conflict was not just between the Quran and the Sunnah and their positions and statements, as we outlined, that the Quran is to be deemed and the Sunnah is to be deemed abrogated or to be of lesser importance and value and strength, or it has to be misinterpreted. Rather, they have also deemed the Quran to contradict one another, the ayat in the Quran to contradict one another. The fourth point that these madhahib have unleashed upon the Muslims and have caused and presented to the Muslims is enmity and hatred and animosity between the Muslims. The ayat with which we started this lecture, where Allah Ta'ala has ordered the Muslims to be united upon the Quran and the Sunnah, and to not follow the ways of the people before them in dividing themselves into sects and groups, and every group being happy with what it is. This is exactly what these madhahib have presented. We will give you some examples of the great animosity between these madhahib. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Hanafi, he passed away in the year 506 after the Hijrah. He says, لو كان لي من الأمر شيء لأخذت على الشافعية الجزية. That if I had power and strength, if it was possible for me, then I would take from the Shafi'is. This Hanafi is saying, I would take from the Shafi'is jizya. Jizya, which is amount or a tax that the non-Muslims, they pay to the Muslims for giving granted security and protection in the Muslim lands or the lands that the Muslims rule. So he says that if I was in power and I had strength, I would take from the Shafi'is jizya, meaning that he deems the Shafi'is to be kuffar and disbelievers and non-Muslims, because the jizya is only paid by the non-Muslims. From them is this statement that Mullah Ali Qari, from the foremost scholars of the Hanafis, who is known as one of the great scholars and jurists in the Hanafi madhab, he has a book in which he has collected the biographies of the Hanafi scholars throughout centuries, Tabaqat al-Hanafiya, the book in which he has compiled the biographies of the Hanafis throughout time until his time. And the proper name of this book is Al-Athmar al-Janiyya fi Asma al-Hanafiyya. Al-Athmar al-Janiyya fi Asma al-Hanafiyya. In this book, he has mentioned the biography of this great Hanafi scholar and imam. Let us find out what this scholar imam was upon and why he has mentioned him with this great praise. His name is Sharafuddin Isa ibn Abi Bakr ibn Ayyub al-Hanafi. Isa ibn Abi Bakr ibn Ayyub al-Hanafi. He has labeled him to be al-Faqih al-Fadil, the great virtuous jurist in the Hanafi madhab. تفقه على مذهب أبي حنيفة فبرع فيه, that he blindly followed and confined himself, restricted himself to the Hanafi madhab and studied it in detail until he became one of the foremost scholars of the Hanafis, this Isa ibn Abu Bakr ibn Ayyub. Then he says وحفظ المسعودي واعتنى بالجامع الكبير وشرحه في عدة مجلدات, that he memorized the foremost text in the Hanafi madhab. Such was the great status of this Hanafi near Mullah Ali Qari, that he memorized the texts in the Hanafi madhab such as Al-Mas'udi and Jami al-Kabir and his explanations. These are well-known texts in the Hanafi madhab. He memorized all of them that contain several volumes. He memorized all of them by heart that contains several volumes. Then what did he do? وَصَنَّفَ كِتَابًا سَمَّاهُ السَّهْمُ الْمُصِيبُ فِي الرَّدْ عَلَى الْخَطِيبِ. He wrote a book which he titled a poisonous or a arrow that has attacked and pierced Al-Khatib. And who is Al-Khatib? Imam Al-Khatib Al-Baghdadi. Imam Al-Khatib Al-Baghdadi, who passed away in the year 463. The great scholar of Islam, the author of great books such as Tarikh Baghdad. So he wrote this book in refutation of this great Imam Al-Khatib Al-Baghdadi. An arrow that he has aimed, that has hurt and pierced and killed Imam Al-Khatib Al-Baghdadi. What does he say? And why has he written this book? Out of his love for Imam Abu Hanifa, his supreme Imam, because Imam Al-Khatib Al-Baghdadi in his book Tarikh Baghdad has narrated the narrations that the scholars of the Salaf have mentioned regarding the weakness of Imam Abu Hanifa in Hadith. Imam Abu Hanifa, this is a unanimous position of the scholars of Hadith, that he was da'if, he was weak in his narration of Hadith. His memory precision in Hadith was weak, and his Hadith, narration of Hadith is to be rejected and it is not to be accepted. And this is not just a position of one person too, this is a unanimous position of the great scholars of Al-Jarh wa Ta'dil, the scholars of praising and criticizing the narrators of Hadith. So what was the crime of Imam Al-Khatib Al-Baghdadi? He has only compiled and combined these statements and mentioned them in the biography of Imam Abu Hanifa. He has just narrated these statements with utmost precision and truthfulness, that which he collected and compiled from his teachers and scholars in mentioning the true status of Imam Abu Hanifa in Hadith. So this Hanafi, as we can see, he has studied the Hanafi madhab, memorized volumes upon volumes in the Hanafi madhab. He has written books refuting the great Imams who are not Hanafis, such as Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi. We will come now to the point we wanted to come to. Mullah Ali Qari, he mentions, showing the great status of this Hanafi Imam, that he deserves to be praised and mentioned in the book of the biography of the great scholars of the Hanafis. He says that قال له والده يوما كيف اخترت مذهب أبي حنيفة وأهلك كلهم شافعية. That how did you become Hanafi? He says his father one day told this person, Isa ibn Abi Bakr ibn Ayyub, that how have you become Hanafi when your entire family are Shafi'iyya? When your entire family are Shafi'is. فقال أترغبون عن أن يكون فيكم رجل واحد مسلم. That he told his father that, do you not want and are you not pleased that amongst you and in our household there's at least one Muslim? That there's only at least one Muslim present, deeming the Shafi'is to be kuffar, to be disbelievers and non-Muslims. That are you, my father and my family, the Shafis, are you not pleased? Are you not happy that at least there's one Muslim amongst you? That there's one Muslim amongst you. This is what these Madhahib have unleashed upon the Muslims from enmity and hatred and animosity, to the point that one of the major Imams of the Hanafis, Safkardi, he says that لا ينبغي للحنفي أن يزوج بنته من شافعي المذهب ولكن يتزوج منهم. He says that it is not permissible for a Hanafi to marry off his daughter to a Shafi'i. It is not permissible for a Hanafi to marry off his daughter to a Shafi'i. But it is permissible for a Hanafi to marry from the Shafi'is. It is not permissible for a Hanafi to marry off his daughter to the Shafi'is, deeming the Shafi'is to be kuffar, to be disbelievers and non-Muslims, and that they are to be dealt with as the Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. That a Muslim woman, she cannot marry one of them. She cannot marry one of them. وَلَكِنْ يَتَزَوَّجْ مِنْهُمْ. However, a Hanafi man, he can marry a Shafi'i woman because she is from the Ahlul Kitab. She is from the Ahlul Kitab. She is to be deemed to be from the Jews and the Christians. And these rulings and these statements are filled in their books. This is not just one scholars of this mentioning. This is something that has come in their books in several of their books. To the point that these madhahib unleashed upon the Muslims, in addition to them not marrying one another and deeming the other to be kuffar, disbelievers, non-Muslims, dealing with them as they are Ahlul Kitab, from that which these madhahib unload from hatred and animosity amongst the Muslims is deeming prayer and salah to be impermissible behind one of the people of the other madhahib. Ibn al-Humam, who is the Imam of the Hanafis, passed away in the year 861, Kamaluddin Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahid ibn al-Humam al-Iskandari, he says in his well-known book Fathul Qadir, which is a foremost text of the Hanafi madhab, in which he has explained the fundamental text of the Hanafi madhab, al-Hidayah. Fathul Qadir fi Sharh al-Hidayah. He says, Ibn al-Humam in this book Fathul Qadir, قال أبو اليسر اقتداء الحنفي بالشافعي غير جائز. That a Hanafi praying the salah, the prayer behind a Shafi'i, it is غير جائز. It is not permissible. It is not permissible. And why is it not permissible? لما روى مكحول النسفي في كتاب له سماه الشعار أن رفع اليدين في الصلاة عند الركوع والرفع منه مفسد بناء على أنه عمل كثير. Why is it not permissible for a Hanafi to pray behind a Shafi'i? Because one of the Hanafis, Makhul al-Nasafi, he has a book, a Shua. In that book he has mentioned, because the Shafi'is, they perform Raful Yadain. They raise their hands before going into ruku and coming up from ruku. They perform Raful Yadain, and the Hanafis, they deem this to be action that deems Salah to be false, that breaks one's prayer and salah. It is action that is, the Hanafis consider a lot of action that breaks one's salah and prayer. That breaks one's salah and prayer. So this is also what these madhahib have unleashed upon the Muslims from the animosity and hatred, not to marry from one another, not to pray one behind one another, deeming each other to be kuffar, to be disbelievers, and to be non-Muslims. As far as the wars based on hatred and animosity between this madhahib, then as the scholars have mentioned, hadith wala haraj, that one can mention several stories, and the books of history are filled with the great wars that occurred between the followers and the fanatics and the extremists of these madhahib, killing one another, slaughtering one another for their madhahib, for their blind following of these madhahib. From them is this story that in the year 469 after the Hijrah, 469 after the Hijrah, one of the rulers of the Muslims, he put an end to the endless wars and killing that was occurring between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is in his land. And he tried to unite them. He tried to unite them. فقال رئيس الشافعية فأما هؤلاء فيزعمون أننا كفار ونحن نزعم أن من لا يعتقد ما نعتقده كان كافرا فأي صلح يكون بيننا. So when he tried to unite the Hanafis and the Shafi'is after the endless killing and wars in the year 469, the leader of the Shafi'is, he refused to unite with them, saying, how can we unite with our enemies, the Hanafis, when they deem us to be kuffar, when they deem us to be disbelievers and non-Muslims. وَنَحْنُ نَزْعَمْ أَلَّا مَنْ لَا يَعْتَقِدْ مَا نَعْتَقِدُهُ كَانَ كَافِرًا. And we also believe that the one who does not follow our path and way, then he is also a kafir, a disbeliever and non-Muslim. فَأَيُّ صُلْحٍ يَكُونْ بَيْنَنَا. So how can we unite? What will we unite upon? Both of us deem each other to be kuffar, to be disbelievers and to be non-Muslims. And if one wants to read these stories of warfare between these fanatics and extremists and blind followers of these madhahib, and the killing and the slaughtering that occurred between them, then he can refer back to some of the books of history, such as the book Mu'jam al-Buldan of Imam Yaqut al-Hamawi, or Tarikh Ibn al-Athir al-Kamil fi Tarikh, in which one will find details about these wars and killing and animosity and hatred between these madhahib. From that is that Imam Yaqut al-Hamawi, he says in his book Mu'jam al-Buldan, he says regarding the area of Asbahan, that is in present day Iran, he says, وَقَدْ فَشَى الْخَرَى فِي هَذَا الْوَقْتِ وَقَبْلَهُ فِي نَوَاحِيهَا لِكَثْرَةَ الْفِتَنِ والتعصب بين الشافعية والحنفية والحروب المتصلة بين الحزبين فكلما ظهرت طائفة نبحت محل أخرى وأحرقتها وخربتها لا يأخذهم في ذلك إل ولا ذمة. That he says regarding Asbahan, that in our times, Imam Yaqut al-Hamawi, he passed away in the year 626 after the Hijrah. He says that in the area of Asbahan in Iran, present day Iran, then in several of his localities and several of his areas, then great trials and tribulations have arose due to the blind followers and fanatics of the Shafi'i and the Hanafi mazhab. And the wars, al-hurub al-muttasila, the wars between them, killing and slaughtering, has continued. And every group that becomes victorious over the other, the Shafi'is, if they become victorious over the Hanafis, or the Hanafis, they become victorious over the Shafi'is, then they go and attack their areas, and they burn everything to the ground, and they demolish their areas, and they have no fear or shame in doing so. And they have no fear or shame in doing so. From the stories is what Ibn al-Athir has mentioned in his book Al-Kamil fi Tarikh. In the year 323 after the Hijrah, 323, immediately after these madhahib took stronghold and fanatism, extremism, blind following of them came into existence. He says regarding the Hanbalis in the city of Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, he says, وَاسْتَظْهَرُوا بِالْعُمْيَانِ الَّذِينَ كَانُوا يَأْوُونَ الْمَسَاجِدِ وَكَانُوا إِذَا مَرَّ بِهِمْ شَافِعِيَّ الْمَذْهَبِ أَغْرَوْا بِهِ الْعُمْيَانِ فَيَضْرِبُونَهُ بِعَصِيِّهِمْ حَتَّى يَكَادْ يَمُوتُ. That the Hanbalis, they used to hide in the dark places and the shadows around the masajid, around the houses of Allah, around the masajid. And if they see a Shafi'i would pass them, the Hanbalis, if they would see a Shafi'i would pass them, they would attack him in those dark places. They would take him to the valleyways and wait for him, and then attack him with their sticks, their sticks and their weapons, hatta yakad yamut, until they would leave him for dead, until they would attack him to a certain extent that he would be close to death. This is the animosity and hatred and wars and enmity that these madhahib have unleashed upon the Muslims. From that which these madhahib have unleashed upon the Muslims is that even the best of the places on earth, the most blessed of places on earth, the house of Allah, the Kaaba, the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, that even this was not safe from their extremism and fanatism and their blind following and enmity and hatred for one another, until they divided the Kaaba and al-Masjid al-Haram into four sections and 4 places. Each section had its own imam. The Hanafis had their own imam, the Malikis, the Shafis, the Hanbalis, and the Hanafis would only pray behind the Hanafis. The Shafi'is would only pray behind the Shafi'is. The Malikis only behind the Maliki imam. The Hanbalis only behind the Hanbali imam. And this is not something that occurred in latter centuries. That rather this occurred in the beginning, inception, when these madhahib came into existence. When these madhahib came into existence, according to one who researches this topic, he will find that these maqamat, these 4 places where these 4 madhahib had their own imams and they would pray just behind them, these existed. They were present in the year 488 after the Hijrah. 488 after the Hijrah. They were present in this year, meaning that they came into existence before this time. Before this time. Ibn Abidin, who is one of the well-known jurists and scholars of the Hanafi madhab, in his book Raddul Muhtar, he says that these 4 maqamat, these 4 places in Masjid al-Haram in the Kaaba, then they came into existence before 500 century, before the year 500. Before the year 500. حين غلب حب المناصب وأنكرها المخلصون ولكن علماء السوء زينوها للسلاطين. That these came into existence due to worldly desires and pleasures, to gain closeness to the rulers who were upon these madhahib, to gain positions, as we mentioned in our previous class, to gain worldly benefits, to be raised in rank amongst the people, to have position of being a judge and an imam and a mufti and a teacher, etc. He says the noble scholars of Islam, they refuted this innovation and they refuted this evil, but the evil scholars, those who follow their desires and worldly benefits, they beautified this innovation to the rulers of Islam, were rulers of Islam. To the point that Ibn Jubair al-Andalusi, he traveled to Mecca, to Masjid al-Haram, to the Kaaba, in the year 578 after the Hijrah. 578 after the Hijrah. He says in his book that I saw there a 5th mihrab, a 5th maqam that had been created, where it was for the Zaydiyah, Shia. That even the Shia now, following the ways of these claimants to be from Ahl-Sunnah, they have also now created their own mihrab and their own maqam, where they had their own imam from the Zaydis and they would pray behind them. He mentions, he witnessed this. He says, كل هذه المذاهب لها أئمة ومقيمون فإذا فرغ إمام مقلد لإمام واحد قام الإمام المقلد لإمام آخر. That he said, I saw that all of this 5 mihrabs and 5 places, they have their own imams and their own people that would pray behind him. When one of those imams, he would pray with his followers from that madhab, then another imam would pray with the followers of his madhab. Allahu Akbar, ma kana ashna wa asmaj hadha al-manzar alladhi kana yuqir ayun al-ada. He says, how evil and how despicable was this, what I witnessed, that only pleases the enemies of Islam. That can only please the enemies of Islam. From that which these madhahib have unleashed upon the people and have trialed and tested the Muslims with, fanatism, extremism to these madhahib and blindly following them, is that they, after rejecting the Quran and the Sunnah and deeming it to be abrogated and misinterpreting them and deeming them to be less in strength and attacking the Sahaba, the narrators of the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the foremost of them being Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu. After all of this, they were not pleased to this extent until they made up fabricated ahadith. They lied upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to increase their ranks and to diminish the ranks of the other madhahib. And these ahadith have been mentioned by the scholars of hadith in their books that are known as al-mawdu'at, in which they have collected fabricated ahadith and lies upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every one of these four madhahib, they made up fake fabricated ahadith attributing it to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to raise their rank and to diminish the rank of the followers of the other madhahib. For example, the Hanafis, they fabricated a hadith in which they said that Anas radiallahu anhu, he narrates that the Prophet ﷺ supposedly, he said, سَيَكُونُ رَجُلٌ فِي أُمَّتِي يُقَالُ لَهُ النُّعْمَانِ بْنُ ثَابِتٍ يُحْيِي دِينَ اللَّهِ وَسُنَّتِي. That the Prophet ﷺ supposedly, in this fake fabricated hadith that the Hanafis have made up, that he said that a person will come in my nation after me, his name will be An-Nu'man ibn Thabit, meaning Imam Abu Hanifa. He will revive the religion of Islam and my sunnah. He will revive the religion of Islam and my sunnah. And in another fabricated hadith, the Prophet ﷺ supposedly has said, Huwa siraju ummati, huwa siraju ummati, huwa siraju ummati, that he is the crown jewel of my nation. And he mentioned that 3 times. The Shafi'is, they were not to be outdone by the Hanafis. They came up with their own fabrication and lie in order to strengthen their rank. They said, they lied upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he supposedly said, "Akrimu Qurayshan, fa inna alimaha yamla tibaq al-ard ilman." That be benevolent and give honor, respect to the Quraysh, for verily a scholar will come from the Quraysh, meaning Imam al-Shafi'i. He was al-Qurashi from the Quraysh tribe. He will come who will fill the entire world with his knowledge. Who will fill the entire world with his knowledge. The Malikis, they were not to be left outdone by the Hanafis and the Shafi'is. They come with their own lies and fabrications. They made up this hadith on attributing it to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he supposedly said, يَخْرُجُ النَّاسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ إِلَى الْمَغْرِبِ فَلَا يَجِدُونَ عَالَمٍ مِنْ عَالِمِ أَهْلِ الْمَدِينَةِ. That the people, they will travel seeking knowledge of Islam from the east to the west of the earth. They will not find a scholar more knowledgeable than the scholar of the region of Medina, meaning Imam Malik rahimahullah. They did not just suffice at making these fake fabricated ahadith to raise this rank. Rather, they made up fake fabricated ahadith to lower the ranks and to attack the other mazahib, such as the Hanafis, making up this fabricated hadith, attributing it to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he supposedly said, يَكُونُ فِي أُمَّتِي رَجُلٌ يُقَالُ لَهُ مُحمد بن إدريس أَضَرَّ عَلَى أُمَّتِي مِنْ إِبْلِيسِ. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam supposedly he said that a person will come in my nation, in the Muslims, he will be known as Muhammad ibn Idris, meaning Imam al-Shafi'i. He will be more dangerous to the Muslims, to the Islamic nation than Iblis, than Shaitan. So this is the evil and the harms that fanatism and extremism to these madhahib and blindly following them and confining oneself, restricting to them, they have unleashed and they have trialed and tested the Muslims with. Then we'll move on to another topic, which is the blind followers of these madhahib. When one of them claims that I am a Hanafi, I follow the Hanafi madhab. One of them claims I'm a Hanbali, I follow the Hanbali madhab. They memorize and recite and read the texts that have been written by these scholars in these madhahib, years and decades, memorizing them, leaving off memorizing the Quran, memorizing the ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, reading these texts that are devoid of any proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah, just speech of men and personal positions and fatwa and rulings, confining themselves, restricting themselves to them, decades upon decades. They are claiming that I am a blind follower of the Hanafi madhab. I am a Hanafi. I am a blind follower of the Shafi'i madhab. I am a Shafi'i. Let us prove now. We will prove that these madhahib and the books that these madhahib, that the scholars who came later on, that they wrote in these madhahib, they are in one valley, and the imams of these madhahib, they're in another valley. There are two worlds. There are two worlds that separate them. If one wants to, a Maliki, a blind follower of the Maliki madhab, if he wants to find the statements and positions and fatwa of Imam Malik, his madhab, his school of thought, then he ought to return to his great book, Al-Muwatta, in which he has mentioned his rulings, positions of jurisprudence. Not to the scholars who came after, who supposedly made up positions, and these positions have become the accepted positions in these madhahib, by which they have opposed the position of these great imam. By which they have opposed the position of this same imam that they're claiming they're blind following and they ascribe to. If one, for example, wants to blindly follow Imam al-Shafi'i, if he wants to find his statements and fatwa in his madhahib, it is upon him to return back to his books such as Al-Umm and Al-Risala that are published and amongst us. Not the books that the Shafi'is after him have written after centuries, and they have positions and fatwa and statements that they claim that this is the position of the Shafi'i madhab, where Imam al-Shafi'i himself has opposed these positions. We'll give some examples. We'll give some examples from this. An example, we will start with the Hanafi madhab. The Hanafis, their position in their books of fiqh, that all of the Hanafis blindly follow, that you will find in all of their books of fiqh, in their books of jurisprudence, in their texts that they memorize and they recite and they confine themselves and restrict themselves to, that when one prays Salatul Janaza, the funeral prayer, then regardless if the person who has died, he is a man or a woman, regardless if he is a male or a female, then the imam who is praying upon them, he should stand in line with their chest. He should line up with their chest. He should put the janais, the bodies in front of him, a man and woman, and line up with their chest. And they have mentioned in their books of fiqh, because the chest is the place of the heart, and the heart is the crown jewel of the human body, and the heart is from where the iman flows, and statements that are devoid of any proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah, that have no value. But when we return back to the imam that they're claiming to blindly follow, that they are ascribing themselves to, Imam Abu Hanifa, let us find what his position is. He says, يقف الإمام عند رأس الرجل ويقف عند وسط المرأة, that the imam, he has to stand at the face and the head of the man when he prays the janazah over him, and he should stand in the middle of the woman, the middle of the female. So if we have both janazas, the man and the woman, so the imam will stand at the head of the man, and the woman, she will be brought a little forward so that she is in the middle. She is in the middle. The imam is praying both at the head of the man and the middle of the woman. This is a position of Imam Abu Hanifa, and he has derived this position from an authentic hadith of Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu, that Imam Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah have narrated, in which it is said that a janazah was brought. So Anas ibn Malik فصلى عليها وأنا خلفه لا يحول بيني وبينه شيء فقام عند رأسه فكبر أربع تكبيرات. That Anas ibn Malik, a male janazah was brought to him. So the narrator says, I was behind him. There was nothing shielding me from viewing him. He stood at his head. He stood at the head of this male who had died, and he made 4 takbirat. He prayed the salat al-janaza. ثم ذهب يقعد فقالوا يا أبا حمزة المرأة الأنصارية. So he went to sit down. So another janazah was brought of a female from the Ansar tribe. So they said, oh Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, Ya Abu Hamza, that was his kunya, pray upon this female also. فَقَرَّبُوهَا فَقَامَ عِنْدَ عَجِيزَتِهَا فَصَلَّى عَلَيْهَا نَحْوَ صَلَاتِهِ عَلَى الرَّجُلِ. That the narrator says, I saw him that he stood in the middle of this woman. He stood in the middle of this woman and he prayed the same prayer that he prayed upon the man with his 4 takbirat. With his 4 takbirat. Qala al-Ala ibn Ziyad, the narrator, after witnessing this, he says, Ya Aba Hamza, هكذا كان يفعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي على الجنازة كصلاتك يكبر عليها 4 ويقوم عند رأس الرجل وعجيزة المرأة. The narrator, after seeing this, he asked, O Abu Hamza, O Anas ibn Malik, is this how the Prophet ﷺ used to pray the janazah? As you have just prayed, he would make 4 takbirat and he would stand at the head of the man and he would stand in the middle of the woman. Qala na'am. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he says, yes, this is how I saw the Prophet ﷺ praying the janazah. And this is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, who has based his position in this matter upon this authentic hadith, that we also, the Ahle-Hadith, base our position upon this authentic hadith. But the Hanafis after him, all of them have opposed this position, and from the first to the last of them, and this is what the Hanafis follow in the millions today, that they stand at the man and the woman in the same place in their, near their chest. Another issue is the issue of a woman whose husband gets lost. She is a married woman and her husband disappears upon her. So she does not know if he is alive or he is dead. She does not know if he is alive or he is dead, because upon this is based matters such as her getting married again or her inheriting. She can only inherit, she can only get married if it is established that he is dead. But this husband has disappeared and one does not know if he is alive or not. Imam Abu Hanifa, regardless of if his position is correct, we are just mentioning examples of how the blind followers, fanatics of these madhahib have opposed the same imams that they claim to blindly follow and that they are claiming to ascribe themselves to. His position is that upon this woman is to wait 120. His position is that if this husband, if this male, if his age reaches 120 years, if his age reaches 120 years, then he can be ruled upon to be dead and that woman can marry and she can inherit. If this man who has disappeared, he reaches 120 years of age from his birth date. This is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. The Hanafis, from the first to the last of them in the books of the Hanafi madhab, they have opposed this position. And they have said that the woman must only wait the average lifespan of the males in her time and in her era and in her locality and land. So the average lifespan, if it was 60, she only waits 60, meaning the husband, if he reaches from his birth 60 years, then she is free to marry off and inherit. And this is an example of how these books of these madhahib, they have outright opposed the imams, very same imams that they're claiming to blindly follow and restrict and confine oneself to their statements and positions and ascribe themselves to them. The blind followers of these madhahib, in reality, they are only blind following and confining, restricting themselves to the statements and positions of the people who came after these imams. People who came after these imams without knowing what these people who came after them were upon, what their proofs were, what their methodology was, opposing these imams that these madhahib are ascribed to. We'll move on, for example, to the Malikis. Why will we just restrict ourselves to the Hanafis? All of these madhahib are similar in these matters. When we mention these examples, we are not just pinpointing one of these 4 madhahib. All of them are similar in all of these issues and problems and in the matters we are discussing. For example, we will mention for the Malikis. Anyone knows how the Malikis pray? They pray with their hands to the side. Al-Isbal. They leave off their hands to the side. They do not fold their hands upon their chest. They do not fold their hands upon their chest. And this is the position that the Malikis, from the first to the last of them, have mentioned in their books of the Maliki madhab. And the Malikis have blindly followed and restricted themselves, confined themselves to them. But their own imam, they are blindly following supposedly and confining themselves to, Imam Malik has opposed them in this position. Imam Malik has opposed them. As we mentioned, where will we find the madhab, the positions and fatwa and judgments of Imam Malik? In his book Al-Muwatta. When we go back to the book Al-Muwatta, we will find this chapter in the first, in Kitab al-Salah, in the book of prayer. He mentions this chapter. Just pay attention to the chapter. Babu wad al-yadain ihdahuma ala al-ukhra fi salah. The chapter heading is enough. That he mentions a chapter placing one hand over the other in the prayer. Placing one hand over the other in the salah, in the prayer. Then he narrates two athar in this chapter. Two athar. One of them is on the authority of Abdul Karim ibn Abi Mukhariq al-Basri. Abdul Karim ibn Abi Mukhariq al-Basri, he was from the junior tabi'een. He was from the junior tabi'een, rahimahullah. He says, من كلام النبوة إذا لم تستحي فاسنا ما شئت ووضع اليدين إحداهما على الأخرى في الصلاة يضع اليمنى على اليسرى. He says that Abdul Karim ibn Abi Mukhariq rahimahullah, he says that from the wisdom and the statements of prophethood is that if you do not have shame, then do as you please. If you do not have any shame, then do as you please. And from them is to place one of the hands over the other in the salah. In the prayer, placing the right over the left hand. Placing the right over the left hand. The second asar that he has narrated is on the authority of Sahl ibn Sa'd as-Sa'idi radiyallahu anhu. From the Sahaba, he says, كان الناس يؤمرون أن يضع الرجل اليد اليمنى على ذراعه اليسرى في الصلاة. That he says that the people were ordered to place the right hand over the left hand in the prayer. To place the right hand over the left hand in the prayer. قال أبو حازم لا أعلم إلا أنه ينمي ذلك. That when a Sahabi, he says, Sahl ibn Sa'd radiallahu anhu, that the people were ordered. Who was ordering them? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The narrator on Sahl ibn Sa'd, Abu Hazim, he says, I do not deem except that yanmi dhalik, that he does raf of this statement, that he attributes it to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a marfu hadith. This is a marfu hadith. As far as the Malikis, who leave off their hands and oppose their own imam in this matter, then they have blindly followed what Imam Malik was forced to do when he was tested and trialed by the ruler of that time, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the second caliph of the Abbasid dynasty, who punished Imam Malik rahimahullah for giving a fatwa regarding a matter that he had warned against. That he had warned against that the one who is forced, then talaq, divorce does not occur from him. If one is forced to divorce, then this divorce does not occur from him. And Imam Malik, he refused to stop narrating this hadith. So Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, he ordered the governor of Medina, who ruled Medina at that time under his caliphate, Ja'far ibn Sulaiman, to beat Imam Malik and to lash him, that caused his shoulder to exit from his that caused his arm to exit from his shoulder. That caused his arm to exit from his shoulder. So he was not able to move one of his hands. He was not able to move one of his hands. Ibrahim ibn Hamad, he says, أنه كان ينظر إلى مالك إذا أقيم من مجلسه حمل يده بالأخرى. That he used to attend the gatherings of Imam Malik after this incident. He would see Imam Malik that if he got up from his gathering where he would narrate the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the masjid of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Medina, Masjid Nabawi, he would have to lift himself up with one of his hands and force himself up because he could not use the other hand. So this darura, necessity for which Imam Malik could not raise and could not fold his hands, upon his chest in the prayer, the Malikis have blindly followed and opposed his own narrations that he have narrated in his book Al-Muwatta. In his book Al-Muwatta, and it is important to note as a point of benefit, we will mention that Imam Malik, he authored the book Al-Muwatta, or started authoring the book Al-Muwatta after this incident by 2 years. After this incident by 2 years. Meaning that what is in Muwatta, it is the ladder of the two affairs. Even if we were to imagine and accept, which we do not accept, that this was the position of Imam Malik, to leave off his hands in prayer. Rather, as we mentioned, it was something that he had to do out of necessity due to the circumstance that arose. Another issue we'll mention, and we'll take a break after this, that the Malikis have outrightly opposed their Imam, who they have claimed to blindly follow and ascribe themselves to, is making the qunut in the Fajr prayer. Making the qunut in the Fajr prayer. The Malikis, from the first to the last of them, have unified that it is from the Sunnah, and it is recommended that one makes the qunut, the dua of qunut in the Fajr prayer. And this is found in all of the masajid of the Malikis all over the world. This is what they follow. But Imam Malik, the ones that they're claiming to blindly follow and make taqleed of and ascribing themselves to him, in his book Al-Muwatta, immediately after the same chapter we just mentioned, Bab wadul yadain ihdahuma ala al-ukhra fi salah, to place one hand over the other in the prayer, he mentions another chapter. In this chapter he says, Bab al-qunuti fi subh, making dua of qunut in the morning, Fajr prayer. And he narrates only one athar in this chapter. And he says, on the authority of Nafi', Malik and Nafi', that Abdullah ibn Umar kana la yaqnutu fi shay'in min as-salah. He narrates this athar that Nafi says that Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, he did not used to make dua qunut in any of his prayers, any of his 5 daily prayers, showing that Imam Malik is in one valley, and the Malikis, who are supposedly blindly following him and confining themselves, restricting themselves to his madhab and attributing themselves to him, they are free from him and they are in another valley. And this can be said regarding all of the remaining madhahib. The people who are blindly following this madhahib, they are rather following the statements of latter scholars who have come, who have written these statements without any proofs, without any evidences, and have opposed the same imams that they are ascribed to. And we will continue after the Maghrib break, inshallah. So we return back to our lecture, and after finishing with some of the issues that we presented as an example in the books of these madhahib, that is the accepted position in these madhahib, but we have presented proofs that establish that the imams themselves, who these madhahib are claiming to blindly follow and who they ascribe to and confine and restrict to his statements and fatwa and positions, that they have opposed their very own imams in these examples that we presented, some matters of jurisprudence that we presented as an example. So the blind followers of these madhahib, the fanatics, extremists of them, they are in reality blindly following the positions and statements of those people who came centuries after these imams, and these statements have outrightly opposed the position and fatwa of these very own imams. Then we'll move on to issues that are known as al-ughlutat or al-ghulutat. And these are one types of issues, and the second type is al-ara'iyat. We will explain what these two issues are. Al-ughlutat or al-ghulutat, they are issues that are of no benefit, questions and issues that yield no benefit, but a person, he delves into these matters and these issues and these questions to show his firmness he dwells into these issues and matters and questions to show his firmness in knowledge and to boast about his knowledge of detailed, intricate aspects. But in reality, these matters are those that are of very little or devoid of any benefit. Devoid of any benefit. And they are known as al-ughlutat or al-ghulutat, which is the plural of ughluta, because they are those issues that the one who dwells into these issues and matters, then in most instances, he will be incorrect and he will err. He will be incorrect and he will err and he will not reach the truth. So these are one types of matter. The second type are al-ara'iyat. Al-ara'iyat. Al-ara'iyat are matters, and al-ara'iyun, these are people who make up issues and matters that have not yet occurred. Made up scenarios, matters that have not occurred, and they say to a scholar or a person, ara'ayta law hadatha kaza wa kaza. Ara'ayta, that's why they are called ara'iyat. Ara'iyat. And the people who dwell into these matters are called al-ara'iyun. Matters that are supposed, matters that are not that have not occurred, that are not a reality, made up matters, imaginary matters. And many of these matters, they are far from being the truth, and they're far from ever occurring. Many of these matters are ayat. They are matters that are extremely difficult, rather impossible that they will ever come to reality and fruition. The scholars of the Salaf, they disliked, severely disliked and discouraged these types of matters. Matters that are devoid of benefit, useless knowledge, and matters that have not yet occurred. That have not yet occurred. There are some ahadith that have been narrated regarding these matters, such as the hadith of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, in which he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, anna nabiyya sallallahu alaihi wasallam naha anil ghulutat, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade these matters that are known as al-ghulutat, those detailed matters, small matters that are devoid of benefit. But these ahadith that have been narrated, they are all weak ahadith. They are not authentic, but we have, alhamdulillah, authentic ahadith that suffices, such as the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, min husni islamil mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni, that from the beautification and perfection, completion of a person's Islam and religion is to leave off that which does not concern him, that which is devoid of benefit, which does not benefit him, which is a Hasan hadith narrated by Imam at-Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah and other than them. Also we have another authentic hadith narrated by Imam Muslim in his book As-Sahih, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ihris ala ma yanfa'uk wasta'in billah wa la ta'jaz, that be keen upon that which benefits you. Do not run after those matters that are devoid of benefit, that contain no benefit. Be keen, strive towards those matters that are of benefit. As we mentioned, these authentic ahadith are sufficient for us to stray far away from these ughlutat and ghulutat and these ara'iyat, these matters that are devoid of benefit or that have not yet occurred, supposed matters, made up matters. The Salaf, as we mentioned, they severely disliked these matters. They severely disliked these matters. Imam al-Awza'i, rahimahullah, from the great jurists of Islam, who had his own madhab, as we mentioned, school of thought, and his positions and fatwa and rulings are mentioned in the books of the Ahle-Hadith and the books of Hadith. He mentioned regarding these matters that they are shawadhul masail, that these matters of ghulutat and ara'iyat, matters devoid of the benefit and made up matters, they are matters that are against the overwhelming majority of the matters that the religion revolves around. They are far away from those matters that the religion revolves around. Imam al-Awza'i rahimahullah also has said, Inna Allah إذا أراد أن يحرم عبده بركة العلم ألقى على لسانه المغاليط فَلَقَدْ رَأَيْتُهُمْ أَقَلَّ النَّاسِ عِلْمًا. That he says, if Allah Azza wa Jal, He wishes upon a person and He deems and He chooses a person to be devoid of the barakah, of the blessing of beneficial knowledge, then he makes him busy with the maghalit, the ghulutat, these issues that are small detailed matters that are devoid of benefit. A person becomes busy with these issues and he is devoid of the blessing of beneficial knowledge. Then he says, فَلَقَدْ رَأَيْتُهُمْ أَقَلَّ النَّاسِ عِلْمًا. I have seen those people who delve into these matters, that they are the people with the least amount of knowledge, the least amount of true beneficial knowledge. Abu Shuraih al-Iskandarani, he is well known by his kunya and this ascription, Abu Shuraih al-Iskandarani. His name is Abdul Rahman ibn Shuraih. He is from the major Atba' al-Tabi'in. From the major Atba' al-Tabi'in, rahimahullah. He says, أَقِلُّوا الْمَسَائِلِ إِلَّا مَا نَزَلْ أَقِلُّوا الْمَسَائِلَ إِلَّا مَا نَزَلْ فَإِنَّهَا تُقَصِّيَ الْقُلُوبَ وَتُورِثُ الْعَدَاوَةِ. He is advising his students from the Atba' al-Tabi'in, from the middle and the junior Atba' al-Tabi'in, that do not delve into matters except that which has occurred, except those matters that are reality, that have occurred. Do not run behind and delve into matters that are made up, supposed, that have not occurred. For verily these made up matters that have not occurred, they harden a person's heart and they create animosity and enmity between the people. A person dwells into these matters that are supposed, then they get into arguments about these matters. It creates an animosity, enmity, and these matters in most part will never occur. They will never become a reality. Ibn Abdul Hakam, from the foremost students of Imam Malik, he says, Su'ila Malik an talab al-ilm. Imam Malik was asked regarding seeking knowledge. What is knowledge? What is true knowledge? So he says, La yatlub illa ma yantafi'u bihi wa la yatlub al-aghalit wal-ikthar. That seeking knowledge, the proper methodology, true knowledge is that which benefits a person. A person should not seek knowledge that is devoid of benefit. That is devoid of benefit. He should not seek al-aghalit, those ughlutat and ghulutat, small, detailed, intricate matters that are devoid of benefit. We wanted to present this as an introduction to the next topic that we are discussing, that these books of fiqh, of these four madhahib, that these latter scholars have written, in which they have filled with their statements and positions and fatwa that are devoid of any proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah, devoid of any blessings of the revelation of Allah from the Quran and the Sunnah. These matters, irrespective of these matters, opposing the same imams that they're claiming to blindly follow and they ascribe to. These books are filled with matters such as the ones we have just described, al-ughlutat and al-ara'iyat. Matters, detailed, intricate, small matters that are devoid of benefit, and matters that have yet to occur, matters that have never occurred and they will never occur. And in most cases, they will never occur. These books are filled with these kind of matters, and those people who are blind followers of these madhahib and restrict themselves to them, extremist fanatics, they spend years and years and decades memorizing one text of another text filled with these matters that are devoid of benefit and that are matters, supposed matters that will never occur. We will mention some examples of these matters. Rather, forget never occurring. Forget never occurring. These are matters that a proper, true Muslim, when he hears them, his head will lower with shame. Forgetting this, regardless, leave these matters opposing the Quran and the Sunnah and the Ijma. Leave that alone. These are matters that even the most basic, common, layman Muslim, if he hears them, his head will lower in shame. Lower in shame. These matters that are far from reality, that are opposed to the basic decency of a Muslim and of Islam. We'll mention some of these matters and we'll start so that someone does not accuse us and say that you have just mentioned one sentence or a few words from a book containing thousands of words of this imam in this text in one of these madhahib. We will go down the list. We will go down the list according to the chapters of jurisprudence. So we will start, for example, with the first chapter that is found in these books of fiqh, these books of these four madhahib, which is Kitab at-Tahara, the book of purity, the purification, the book of purification. Al-Hasfaki, he is from the great scholars and jurists of the Hanafis. Rather, he was the Mufti of the Hanafis in the city of Damascus. Mufti al-Hanafiya fi Dimashq. The Mufti, supreme Mufti of the Hanafis in the capital of Syria, Damascus. Alauddin Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad al-Hisni al-Hasfaki al-Hanafi. He passed away in the year 1088. 1088. He says in his book, he says in the chapter in his book Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar, all of the Hanafis, the blind followers, the extremists, the fanatics of this madhab, all of them have memorized and recited and perfected this book Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar. It is one of the fundamental books of the Hanafi fiqh, of the Hanafi madhab. Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar, in which he is explained Tanwir al-Absar wa Jami al-Bihar, Shar Tanwir al-Absar and Jami al-Bihar, another text of the Hanafi madhab. He says in Bab al-Ghusl, the chapter of Ghusl, taking the purifying bath, in his book of Tahara, in the book of purification, he says, "Wala inda wat bahimatin aw maytatin aw saghiratin ghair mushtahad." He says that ghusl, it will not be obligatory. This is the fiqh that these people have mentioned in these books, that the people are memorizing, that they are spending their lives memorizing and perfecting and running after. He says that ghusl is not obligatory. It is not wajib upon the person who has intercourse, a'udhu billah, with an animal. If someone has intercourse with an animal, then ghusl is not obligatory upon him. Or the one who has intercourse with a dead person. Or the one who has intercourse with a dead person, or the one who has intercourse with a young girl, waliyadhu billah. This is the fiqh that these people have mentioned in their books, that they have claimed that they have reached the pinnacle of understanding in religion and in the knowledge of jurisprudence. This is the fiqh that they have mentioned. He goes on in this chapter. He says, "Amma fi duburi nafsihi farajjaha fi an-nahr adam al-wujub illa bil-inzal." Waliyadhu billah. He says, the one who has intercourse with himself, he enters his private part from the back side, then he says the proper position is that ghusl is not wajib upon him, not obligatory, except if he ejaculates. Waliyadhu billah. These are masail, these are statements of fiqh that these people have mentioned. He says, going on to another chapter, Bab al-Imama. Bab al-Imama. Who should be the Imam in the salawat? Who is more in right of leading the 5 daily prayers? He says, وَالْأَحَقُّ بِالْإِمَامَ الْأَعْلَمْ بِأَحْكَامِ الصَّلَاةِ. That the one who is most deserving to be an Imam, to lead the people in the salawat, is the one who has the most knowledge about the rulings of the salah, of the prayer. Okay, we might accept this from him. Then he says, ثُمَّ الْأَحْسَنُ تِلَاوَةً لِلْقُرْآنِ. Then the one who is more perfect and his recitation of the Quran is more beautiful, is more perfect and beautiful. Okay, we will accept this from him. ثُمَّ الْأَوْرَعِ. Then the one who is the most fearing of Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay, we will accept this. ثُمَّ الْأَسَنُ. Then the one who is the most older amongst the people, we will accept. ثُمَّ الْأَحْسَنُ خُلُقًا. The one who has the best manners. The one who has the best manners. Okay, we will accept this from him. ثُمَّ الْأَحْسَنُ وَجْهًا. Now we are delving into matters that are straying us away. ثُمَّ الْأَحْسَنُ وَجْهًا. The one who has a beautiful face, whose face is more beautiful than the other. Then he says, ثُمَّ الْأَشْرَفُ نَسَبًا. Those who has a higher lineage, whose lineage is above and better than the others. Then he continues to say, ثُمَّ الْأَحْسَنُ زَوْجَةً. The one who is most deserving of leading the salawat, the 5 daily prayers from the imams, is the one whose wife is the most beautiful. Whose wife is the most beautiful. Then he says, ثم الأكبر رأسا والأصغر عضوا. Then the one who is most deserving of leading prayer is the one who has the biggest head and the smallest private part. And the smallest private part. Is this the fiqh that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has revealed in the Quran and the Sunnah, that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah has left amongst the Muslims, waliyadhu billah? We'll move on to another book of the Hanafis, Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiyya. Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiyya, and this is well known in the Indo-Pak subcontinent as Fatawa Alamgir. Fatawa Alamgir, because it was authored upon the order of the ruler of the Mughals, the ruler of the Muslim dynasty in India, Alamgir, Abul Muzaffar Muhyiddin Muhammad Aurangzeb Alamgir. He passed away in the year 1118. 1118. He ordered the authorship of this book by collecting 23 of the so-called top jurists, the top fuqaha and scholars of the Hanafi madhab in the lands of the Indo-Pak subcontinent in that time. And he made the supervisor over this project the Hanafi Imam of that time, Nizamuddin al-Burhanpuri al-Balkhi, from the city of Burhanpur in India. He made him as the supervisor, and under him were 23 of the supposed top jurists and scholars of the Hanafi madhab of the time, in which they compiled this book, Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiyya or Fatawa Alamgir. And it is mentioned regarding this book that they have only compiled those positions and fatwa and statements from the Hanafi madhab that are the most authentic and correct. That is the most authentic and correct, and they are the foundational positions of the Hanafis. Let us find out what are these authentic and correct and foundational positions of the Hanafis. So we'll move on in the book of Tahara. We'll move on. He says in Bab al-Najasa, in this book that these scholars have compiled, Fatawa al-Hindiyya, it is mentioned in the Bab al-Najasa wa ahkamuha, the chapter regarding impurity and its rulings. In the book of purification, it is said, إِذَا أَصَابَتِ النَّجَاسَةُ بَعْدَ أَعْضَائِهِ وَلَحِسَهَا بِلِسَانِهِ حَتَّى ذَهَبَ أَثَرُهَا يَطْهُرُ. It is said that if a person, that something of impurity touches him, something of impurity has become connected with some of his body parts, something of impurity such as urine or something other that is impure, it has touched his body part. So he said, if someone was to lick this off with his finger, then he can become pure. If someone licks this off with his finger and saliva, if he cleans it, then that impurity is removed. Meaning, you remove the impurity from your skin and enter it into your stomach. This is the fiqh that has been mentioned in these books. In Fatawa Al-Hindiyya, Fatawa Alamgir, we'll move on to the next book, Kitab al-Sawm, the rulings regarding fasting. He says in Bab, or it is mentioned in Bab, Ma yujib al-qada, that upon which a person, if he does, it is upon him to make up the fast. If he does something while he's fasting, some act, it is upon him to make up the fast. What are these acts in these books? It is mentioned in Fatawa Alamgir, وَإِذَا جَامَعَ بَهِيمًا أَوْ مَيِّتًا أَوْ جَامَعَ فِيمَا دُونَ الْفَرْجِ وَلَمْ يُنزِلْ لَا يَفْسُدُ صَوْمُهُ. It is said that if a person, he has intercourse وَلِيَعْذُ بِاللَّهِ with an animal, or with a dead person, or he has intercourse in a place other than the private part of a woman, a'udhu billah, and he does not ejaculate, then his fasting is correct. This is the fiqh that the blind followers and fanatics are memorizing and restricting themselves and confining themselves to. Again, we'll move on to another book in Fatawa Al-Hindiyya, Fatawa Alamgir, Kitab al-Manasik, the next chapter that they mention, the book of Hajj. In it is mentioned Bab al-Jima' fil Hajj wal Umrah, having intercourse while one is performing Hajj and Umrah. It is mentioned in this book, وكذا لو عانقها بشهوة ولو أتى بهيمة فأولجها فلا شيء عليه إلا إذا أنزل فيجب عليه الدم ولا تفسد حجته ولا عمرته والعياذ بالله. That if a person, he hugs his wife with pleasure and desire, or if he had intercourse والعياذ بالله with an animal, then nothing is obligatory upon him except if he ejaculates, and if he does, then he has to give the kafara of the dam. He has to slaughter or sacrifice an animal in Mecca. But even if he has intercourse with this animal, his hajj and his umrah is correct. It is not deemed to be false. It is not deemed to be false. Let us move on to another book of the Hanafis. The book of Al-Marghinani. Al-Marghinani, he is considered the pinnacle, one of the foremost of the scholars of the Hanafis. He has the book Al-Hidayah, which is the book that every blind follower and every extremist and fanatic of the Hanafi madhab starts before he reads the Quran. Before he reads and memorizes the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he starts with memorizing this book Al-Hidayah. So Al-Marghinani, Abu al-Hasan, Burhanuddin Ali ibn Abi Bakr ibn Abdul Jalil Al-Farghani Al-Marghinani. He passed in the year 593. He wrote this book Al-Hidayah, the fundamental text in the Hanafi madhab. Then this is an explanation he wrote of a text he wrote of Bidayatul Mubtadi. Al-Hidayah fi Shar Bidayat al-Mubtadi. He wrote the first text, Bidayat al-Mubtadi. Then he explained it in his book Al-Hidayah, which is one of the fundamental books of the Hanafi madhab. Let us find out what he says. It is mentioned he is Shaykh al-Hanafiyya, min akabir fuqaha al-Hanafiyya, that he is the topmost supreme scholar of the Hanafis, from the greatest jurists of the Hanafi madhab. He says we'll move on to another chapter and book, Kitab al-Hudud. Once we have dealt with some of the chapters of the acts of the pillars of Islam, of tahara, purity, and salah, prayer, and fasting, saum, and hajj, pilgrimage. Now we'll move on to Kitab al-Hudud. Kitab al-Hudud, the criminal law of Islam, and that which pertains to it. He mentions in this book, in Bab Hadd al-Zina, the punishment for, the criminal punishment in Islam for fornication, for zina. He says in this book, Al-Hidayah, he says, وَمَنْ وَطَعَ بَهِيمَةً فَلَا حَدَّ عَلَيْهِ لِأَنَّهُ لَيْسَ فِي مَعْنَى الزِّنَا. A'udhu billah, that the one who has intercourse with an animal, then there is no punishment upon him, because this is not considered to be zina. This is not considered to be intercourse. وَالْعِيَاذُ billah. This is what Al-Marghinani and these people have mentioned in these books, that are the fundamental texts of these madhahib, that these blind followers and fanatics memorize and revise and devote their entire lives, restricting themselves, confining themselves to these kind of positions and these kind of statements and fatwa that are far away from the Quran and the Sunnah. Rather, they're far away from the same imams that they are supposedly blindfolding and ascribing themselves to. I want to ask the listeners and the Muslims, if this is the fiqh, is this the fiqh, the jurisprudence and the understanding of the religion that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has and the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has ordered the Muslims with? Is this the fiqh and understanding and jurisprudence of religion that the Prophet ﷺ has praised the one who seeks it and attains it? He said in authentic hadith narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, that has been narrated by Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan radiyallahu anhuma, that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqqihhu fid din. That whoever Allah Ta'ala wishes good for, He gives him fiqh in the religion of Islam. He gives him understanding in the religion of Islam. He gives him the knowledge of jurisprudence. Is this the knowledge of religion and jurisprudence that has been mentioned, that we have just mentioned, that Allah Ta'ala has praised, or that Allah Ta'ala has praised a person to delve into and to gain and to follow? Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhum, as we alluded in the beginning of a lecture, that he saw that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he entered, or he went to relieve himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Ibn Abbas, he placed the water of wudu where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered, so that when he would return, he would find the wudu which he can perform wudu with. So when the Prophet ﷺ returned and he saw the water of wudu waiting for him, he asked, Man wada'a hadha? That who has placed this? Who has placed this jar or utensil of water for me to perform wudu? For ukhbira, he was informed that it was Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. Faqala Allahumma faqihhu fid din. The Prophet ﷺ, out of his happiness and pleasure of the understanding of this young boy, Abdullah ibn Abbas, who knew that the Prophet ﷺ, if he entered a place to relieve himself, he would like and want to perform wudu. He placed his water, he made this great dua for him to Abdullah ibn Abbas by saying, Allahumma faqihhu fid din. Oh Allah, grant him fiqh in the religion of Islam. Grant him the understanding of the religion of Islam and the knowledge of jurisprudence. Is this the knowledge of jurisprudence that we have just mentioned that has come in these books with these heinous and these shameless issues and statements and fatwa and rulings? Is this what the Prophet ﷺ has made dua for a person to attain and to gain and delve into? Wallahul musta'an. Then we'll finish off with our last issue in this brief lectures, because the time does not permit anything more than this, which is the issue of if the haqq, the truth, if it is confined in these four madhahib that we have amongst us today. There are people who claim, the fanatics and extremists and the blind followers of this madhahib, that the haqq, the truth, the correct position in every single matter of the religion of Islam, then it is restricted in these four madhahib. It is restricted in these four madhahib. And there's no position and matter and issue of Islam that every single one of these four madhahib has erred in. The truth is within these four madhahib. And by this they try to claim that anyone who leaves these four madhahib or follows a position that is not mentioned in these four madhahib, then he has deviated. Then he has been led astray. He has opposed the ijma, supposedly, the consensus of the Muslims. And some of them have even authored books in this regard, such as Al-Hafidh ibn Rajab. He has authored a book in deeming the one, in refuting the one who has followed other than these four madhahib in any single matter of the religion, as if the truth and the correct position and the haqq is restricted to these four madhahib. We'll mention that there's several issues in which these madhahib, these four madhahib, they have not reached the truth. There are several positions in which these madhahib, they have not reached the truth, and they have not accepted the correct position. They have not accepted the correct position, rather the truth and the correct position lies outside what these four madhahib have agreed upon. What these four madhahib have agreed upon. Without taking more time, I would like to just mention one issue that caused a great deal of trial and tribulation for one of the great imams of our ummah, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, the issue of a person when he divorces and he says the word talaq 3 times in one sitting, does it count as 1 or 3? Does it count at 1 or 3? The Quran and the Sunnah have come explicitly with this: a person who sits in one sitting and divorces his wife by giving her 3 talaqs, 3 divorces in one sitting, it is counted as 1. It is counted as 1. This is a ruling of the Quran and the Sunnah and the Salaf. But as we will mention, that in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the second caliphate of Islam, the people, they started to play around and be lax in this matter. So he ruled, due to the circumstances and political circumstances at that time, he ruled for these 3 talaq in one sitting to be counted as 3. To be counted as 3. And the 4 madhahib, they are all united on these 3 talaq in one sitting to count as 3. To count as 3, and they have not reached the haqq, the truth and the correct position in this issue. The correct position according to the Quran and the Sunnah and the position of the Salaf is that 3 talaqs in 3 divorces in one sitting is counted as one divorce, as one divorce. The proof of this are the ayat of at-talaq in the Quran, the ayat of divorce in the Quran. Allah Ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nabi, إِذَا طَلَّقْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ فَطَلِّقُوهُنَّ لِعِدَّتِهِنَّ. That, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you or the Muslims, they were to divorce their wives, then divorce them according to their iddah, according to their periods. According to their periods, meaning that a person, if he wishes to divorce, then he divorces his wife, first divorce, then there's a period of waiting which is 3 salasatu quru, which is 3 menstrual cycles. 3 menstrual cycles. He can take the wife back during this period. He can take the wife back during this period. Then he gives divorce a second time. Again, he has 3 menstrual cycles period where he can take her back. The third time that he gives the talaq, that is the final talaq, and she is separated from him. She is separated from him. Allah Ta'ala has ordered the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims who followed him with this to give talaq in his proper periods. In his proper periods. From the Sunnah is this hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma that has been narrated by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, authentic hadith. He says, كان الطلاق على عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأبي بكر والسنتين من خلافة عمر طلاق الثلاث واحدة. He says that divorce and talaq in the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then in the entire caliphate of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, 2.5 years that he was a caliphate, and the first 2 years of the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, the 3 talaqs in one sitting, they were counted as one. They were counted as one. فقال عمر بن الخطاب إن الناس قد استعجلوا في أمر كانت لهم فيه أنات فلو أمضيناه عليهم فأمضاه عليهم. So after the first 2 years of the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he saw that the people, they started playing around and being lax, that one would sit reclining in his comfort, and he would say talaq, talaq, talaq 3 times. He would play around, joke around, and take this an easy matter and take it lightly, saying talaq 3 times in one sitting, knowing that it will be counted as one. So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu wanted to punish and teach these people a lesson. These people who are playing around, joking around, being lax in this matter. So he said, فَلَوْ أَمْضَيْنَاهُ عَلَيْهim. He said, it would be a good position and view if I rule that these 3 are counted as 3. These 3 in one sitting are counted as 3. فَأَمْضَاهُ عَلَيْهim. So he ruled with this. He ruled with it being counted as 3. As we see with this authentic hadith with Sahih Muslim, in the entire lifetime of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 23 years of his prophethood. Then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's caliphate, 2.5 years. And even the first 2 years of Umar ibn al-Khattab, 3 talaqs in one sitting were counted as 1. Then Umar ibn al-Khattab, for the circumstances that arose at that time that necessitated it, he legislated it to be 3. He legislated it to be 3. And this is his personal position that he saw beneficial to the Muslims at that time. As we mentioned in one of our previous lectures, from his positions that he saw beneficial at that time was forbidding the people from performing Hajj at-Tamattu. Hajj at-Tamattu, where a person enters Ihram, performs Umrah, then he exits his Ihram. Then he enters his Ihram again from the days of Hajj. So he forbade the people due to the rush of the people at that time and to control the people. He forbade it. And we mentioned the statements of his own son, Abdullah ibn Umar, radiyallahu anhuma, when the people mentioned, how are you performing tamattu, or how do you deem it permissible when your own father forbade it? So he said, man abi, who is my father? Who is my father? Sana'ahu Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has performed or legislated and approved of tamattu. So this is another example of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu using that which was beneficial at the circumstances at that time to necessitate it. But the 4 madhahib, they have all restricted themselves to the second position of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, in which they have counted the 3 talaq to be 3 in one sitting. To be 3 in one sitting. And this is what continued with the 4 madhahib in the pinnacle of their times until Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah came, and he ruled with 3 talaqs in one sitting to be counted as 1 according to the Quran and according to the Sunnah. And these four madhahib and the fanatics and extremists of these four madhahib, they hurt and harmed Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. And they made his life problematic, and they put him in trials and tribulations until they entered him the darkness of jail cells because of this fatwa. And they accused him of opposing the religion of Islam and opposing the Quran and the Sunnah and the ijma, the consensus of the Muslims, not knowing out of their ignorance that this is a position of many of the scholars of the Salaf. This is a position of many of the scholars of the Salaf. From the Sahaba, we'll just mention some names that one can refer back to the books of Hadith, the books that have compiled the fiqh and jurisprudence of the Ahle-Hadith to find their positions. From the Sahaba, Abdurrahman ibn Auf and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Zubair ibn al-Awwam and Ali bin Abi Talib and Abdullah ibn al-Abbas radiallahu anhum, they viewed that 3 talaq in one sitting were counted as one. From the Tabi'een is Sa'id ibn Jubair and Ikrimah and Ata ibn Yasar and Tawus, they counted it to be one. From the Atba'u Tabi'een, Amr ibn Dinar, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, they have counted it to be one. From the Atba' Tabi' al-Atba' are the great jurist of Islam, Ishaq ibn Rahuya. Ishaq ibn Rahuya, who also had his madhab and school of thought, and his statements and fatwa are present in the books of the Ahlul-Hadith. He also ruled with 3 talaq in one sitting to be one. We'll mention some of these statements as examples. Abdullah ibn Abbas, we just mentioned the hadith that he narrated on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that what occurred in his lifetime. It is also narrated, Abu Dawood narrated on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that he said, إِذَا قَالَ أَنْتَ طَالِقْ ثَلَاثًا بِفَمٍ وَاحِدٍ فَهِيَ وَاحِدًا. This has been narrated by Abdul Razzaq as-San'ani in his book Al-Musannaf on the authority of his Shaykh and teacher Abu Dawood at-Tayalisi. Abu Dawood at-Tayalisi, that Abdullah ibn Abbas, this Athar, he says that if you say to your wife in one sitting, Anti taliq, that you are divorced 3 times with one mouth in one sitting, it is counted as one. It is counted as one. We'll move on to Tawus. Tawus, from the Imams of the Tabi'een, Tawus ibn Kaysan. He, Abdul Razzaq as-San'ani in his book Al-Musannaf, he narrates on his authority that he says, on his son Ibn Tawus, he narrates on the authority of his father, أنه كان لا يرى طلاقا ما خالف وجه الطلاق ووجه العدة وأنه كان يقول يطلقها واحدة ثم يدعها حتى تنقضي عدتها. That Ibn Tawus mentions regarding his father, Imam Tawus rahimahullah, that he did not believe in the talaq that opposed the Quranic ayat of giving a iddah, a break between the talaqs, between the 3 talaqs. And he would say, yutalliquha wahida, that 3 talaq in one sitting are counted as one, and he should leave her to complete that period. Complete the period until the next talaq if he wishes to do that. We'll mention a statement of Ishaq ibn Rahuya, Imam Ishaq, the great jurist of Islam. It is mentioned, Imam Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Marwazi in his book Ikhtilaf al-Ulama, in which he compiled the schools of thought and the rulings and the fatwa of the great Imams of the Salaf and the great jurists of the Salaf. He narrates on Imam Ishaq ibn Rahuya, rahimahullah, he says, Talaq al-thalath lil-bikr wahida, that giving talaq 3 times in one sitting, it is counted as one. It is counted as one. So Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah did not come with something new, but the fanatics and the extremists, in their blind attachment to these madhahib and blindly following them, they hurt him, harmed him. It is mentioned that in the year 719 after the Hijrah, after they tried to get him to retract this fatwa of counting 3 as one and trying to pressure him and bully him into doing so, and he did not retract and recant, and he stood firm upon the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah and the madhab of the Salaf. The blind followers of those times, the scholars of evil and su, the scholars of evil, they used the rulers against him, and they instigated them against him by saying Ibn Taymiyyah allows zina, fornication. Ibn Taymiyyah allows zina because a person who gives talaq 3 times, she is divorced 3 times. Now if he returns back to her or takes her back, he's performing zina, fornication with her. So they ruled upon, they instigated the rulers against him until he was entered into the jail cell in the year 721 720, and he stayed in the jail for 6 months. He stayed in the jail being patient upon the trial he was going through for 6 months, and he left the jail in the month of Muharram in the year 721. So this was just one example we wanted to present of an issue that the 4 madhahib have united upon, that in which they have missed the truth and they have not reached the correct position, the position that is established by the Quran and the Sunnah and by the scholars of the Salaf, that the Prophet ﷺ was upon, that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was upon, that Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu in the first 2 years of his caliphate was upon, that 3 talaqs, divorces in one sitting are counted as one, and there are several other issues that one can mention that these 4 madhahib have not reached the truth. And we will end our lecture and this lecture series here, this brief lecture series, that we wish and we pray to Allah Azza wa Jal that in what we presented was some benefit, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us ikhlas, sincerity in our statements and in our actions, and bless us with beneficial knowledge and righteous actions. If there are any questions, then we can address them inshallah.
This issue of the Sلسلة of Ahle-Hadith started before Abu Hanifa. It seemed Ibrahim al-Nakhai, and they started some of these things.
I mean, the scholars of Kufa, they started to enter the realm of Rai and basing their fatwa and their positions upon Rai and giving precedence to analogy and qiyas and Rai over the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, until Imam Abu Hanifa, he came and he furthered this school of thinking and this methodology and became the Imam of the Ahlul Rai in his time, because he took it from his Shaikh and teacher Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman, who was one of the jurists and scholars of Kufa, and he took it from Ibrahim al-Nakhai. So without doubt, this was a succession that happened, but Imam Abu Hanifa and the scholars who came after him, they took it to the utmost top level and completed this school of thought and this methodology and laid down its conditions and foundations and rules and regulations. No.
Can you give some more examples of the rulings which are outside of the 4 madhahib?
I mean, the examples are many, but from the examples are the one we mentioned. From the examples is the issue of the number of raka'at of the night prayer. The number of raka'at of the night prayer. The 4 madhahib and their blind followers and fanatics, they have claimed that all the 4 madhahib, they are united in saying that the night prayer is 20 raka'at. And in this also they have erred and they have not reached the correct position and the truth. The correct position and the truth that the Prophet ﷺ, he never prayed in his night prayer more than 11 raka'ah. And this is what Umar ibn al-Khattab himself, who they use as his action as a proof for deeming 3 talaqs to be in one sitting to be 3, but they do not accept his action in the night prayer. When he united the Muslims in his caliphate behind one imam in the night prayer, behind 2 imams, Tamim al-Dari and Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhuma, he ordered them to pray according to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to establish 11 rak'at. But these 4 madhahib, as they claim that they are united in deeming the night prayer to be 20 rak'at, and they have erred and they have not reached the truth and the correct position in this matter. No. If there are no any questions, then we'll end our session here. والله تعالى أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون